Sarah Chen sat in the cold metal chair and watched the alien speakers argue about human lives like they were talking about numbers on a screen. The Galactic Council meeting room was huge and filled with creatures from dozens of different worlds. Some looked like giant insects, others like walking trees, and a few resembled nothing she had ever seen in her worst nightmares. She had been coming to these meetings for 3 years now. 3 long years of listening to excuses while human colonies burned. 3 years of watching her people die while these aliens talked about acceptable losses and strategic necessities. The Zephyrian representative stood at the center of the room. His skin was blue-green like old copper, and his forearms moved as he spoke. His voice came through the translation device as a cold, mechanical sound. The attack on the New Geneva colony was unfortunate, he said, his tone suggesting he was discussing the weather. But we must understand that the hegemony forces were responding to what they saw as a threat. 40,000 human deaths, while regrettable, fall within acceptable parameters for this type of military action. Sarah felt something snap inside her chest. 40,000 people, men, women, children. Her own sister had lived on New Geneva with her family. Had lived there until 6 months ago when the hegemony ships arrived and turned the entire colony into glass and ash. She looked around the room at the other council members. The Kethrani delegate was cleaning his crystalline claws, looking bored. The Altarian was checking some kind of datapad. None of them cared. None of them had ever cared. For 3 years, Earth had sent diplomats to these talks. For 3 years, they had followed every rule, respected every custom, and tried to find a peaceful solution. And what had they gotten in return? More dead colonies, more excuses, more talk about acceptable losses. The hegemony empire had been expanding into human space for 5 years now. They claimed that humans were too young a species to hold so much territory. They said that older, more established civilizations deserved those worlds more. The Galactic Council had agreed to these peace talks, but Sarah was beginning to understand that they had never been about peace at all. They were about buying time. Time for the hegemony to finish what they had started. Time to make sure that when the talking was done, there would be no humans left to complain about the final solution. The Zephyrian continued his speech. We must also consider that human expansion has been aggressive, perhaps too aggressive for such a young species. The galaxy has an order, and that order must be maintained. Sarah stood up slowly. The room fell silent. All those alien eyes turned to look at her. She could feel their contempt, their assumption that she would sit back down and accept whatever scraps they threw her way. Ambassador Chen, said Counselor Prime Zalthis, the ancient leader of the Kethrani. His voice sounded like grinding stone. You were not given permission to speak. I don't need your permission anymore, Sarah said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the massive room. The Terran Federation is withdrawing from these talks. The room erupted. Aliens chittered, roared, and made sounds she couldn't identify. The translation devices couldn't keep up with all the noise. Sarah waited for the chaos to die down. When it did, she continued, We came here in good faith. We believed that civilized beings could sit down and find a solution that didn't involve the murder of innocent people. We were wrong. She picked up her datapad and the files she had brought with her. 3 years of reports, casualty lists, and diplomatic notes that had been ignored or dismissed. 3 years of watching her people die while these creatures played their political games. You want to know what humanity is capable of? She asked, looking directly at the Zephyrian who had just called the New Geneva massacre acceptable. You've never seen us fight. You've never seen what we do when we stop playing by your rules. You've only seen us try to be civilized. The Zephyrian's forearms spread wide in what might have been amusement. Are you threatening the council, human? Sarah smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply informing you that humanity is done asking for permission to defend itself. We tried to do this the easy way. We tried to follow your laws and customs. We tried to be the kind of species you could respect. She walked toward the exit, her small human delegation following behind her. The alien representatives watched them go, most looking annoyed or amused. A few looked thoughtful, and fewer still looked worried. At the door, Sarah turned back one last time. You made one very big mistake, she said. You assumed that because we wanted peace we were weak. You assumed that because we followed your rules, we couldn't make our own. You assumed that because we're young, we're helpless. The room was completely silent now. In 6 months, maybe less, you're going to remember this moment. You're going to remember the day you decided that human lives didn't matter, and when that day comes, when you see what we're really capable of, remember that we gave you a choice. We offered you peace and you chose war. Sarah walked out of the council chambers and didn't look back. Behind her, the aliens began to talk again, but their voices sounded different now. Less certain, less confident. Captain Torres was waiting for her in the docking bay. His uniform was crisp and his face was stone. "Ma'am," he said with a salute. "Orders?" Sarah handed him a sealed data chip. "Send this to Fleet Command. Authorization code is Phoenix Rising." Torres looked at the chip and his eyes widened slightly. He had been a military officer long enough to know what those words meant. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "Captain, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. It's time the galaxy learned what humans are really like when someone threatens our children." The human ships left the council station without ceremony. No goodbyes, no final diplomatic gestures. They simply powered up their engines and disappeared into the void. In the council chambers, the debate raged on about what to do about the human problem. Most of the representatives seemed to think that humanity would eventually come crawling back. After all, what could one young species do against the combined might of the galaxy? Counselor Prime Zalthus was not so confident. His species was old, older than most others in the galaxy. They remembered stories that the younger races had forgotten, stories about a species that had once walked between the stars like they owned them, stories about the ones who had come before and then vanished, leaving only ruins and warnings. He looked at the empty seats where the human delegation had been sitting and felt a chill run through his crystalline bones. The galaxy was about to remember why the ancients had feared the dark between the stars, and why they had built their civilizations around rules that were supposed to keep the sleeping giants from waking up. Admiral Krathzek had commanded hegemony fleets for over 30 years. He had conquered 17 star systems and defeated the combined navies of 4 different species. Nothing in the galaxy scared him anymore, until the morning he woke up to find that Kepler 442 was gone. "Explain this to me again," he said to his intelligence officer. Staring at the empty space where their forward operating base should have been, the massive fortress had been built inside an asteroid. It was supposed to be unsinkable, unmovable, and completely secure. Now there was nothing there but empty space and confused patrol ships. "Sir, at 0347 Standard Time, all contact with Kepler 442 was lost," reported Commander Vexhala. Her voice shook slightly. "The last transmission was a routine status update. Everything was normal, then nothing." "Nothing?" Krathzek turned to face her. "A moon-sized fortress doesn't just disappear. Where are the debris? Where are the escape pods? Where are the distress beacons?" "That's just it, sir. There's nothing. No wreckage, no signs of battle, no radiation signatures. It's like the entire base was just erased." Krathzek felt a cold sensation in his stomach. In 30 years of warfare, he had never seen anything like this. Bases could be destroyed, certainly. Ships could be captured or blown apart. But complete disappearance? That was something else entirely. "What about the humans?" he asked. "Any sign of human ships in the area?" "No, sir. Our long-range sensors show no human vessels within 20 light-years of Kepler 442. In fact, we haven't detected any human military activity since they left the peace talks 6 weeks ago." That was another thing that bothered Krathzek. When the humans had walked away from the negotiations, everyone expected them to start making noise. Protests, sanctions, angry messages. Instead, there had been complete silence. The human colonies had gone dark. Their communication networks had stopped transmitting, and their trade ships had simply vanished from the space lanes. It was like the entire human race had decided to hide. "Sir," interrupted the communications officer, "we're receiving a distress signal from Research Station Wolf 359. Put it through." The message was broken and full of static, but the panic in the voice was clear. "Unknown vessels approaching, moving faster than our sensors can track. They're not using jump drives. How are they moving so fast? Request immediate assistance. They're not responding to communications. Oh gods, they're here." The transmission cut to static. Krathzek stared at the communications panel. Wolf 359 was a heavily defended research facility in the heart of hegemony space. It was surrounded by patrol fleets and early warning systems. Nothing should have been able to approach it without being detected hours in advance. "How far is Wolf 359 from here?" he asked. 14 hours at maximum jump speed, sir." "Set course immediately, and send word to all fleet commanders." I want every available ship converging on Wolf 359. But when the Hegemony Relief Fleet arrived at Wolf 359, they found the same thing they had found at Kepler 442. Empty space. No wreckage. No survivors. No evidence that the research station had ever existed. The only difference was a message buoy floating where the station should have been. A simple text message in perfect Hegemony standard. You wanted to see what humans do when they stop following your rules. Now you know. This is your only warning. Across Hegemony space, the pattern repeated. Military bases, research stations, supply depots, and patrol fleets simply vanished. Not destroyed in battle, not captured, not damaged. Just gone, as if they had never existed at all. The Hegemony High Command was in chaos. Their most experienced admirals had no explanation for what was happening. Their scientists insisted that the technology being used was impossible. Their intelligence services could find no trace of human ships anywhere. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves stood on the observation deck of the TSF Prometheus and watched the stars. The ship moved through space without making a sound, its quantum tunneling drive bending reality around them. To any outside observer, the Prometheus didn't exist. It was there and not there at the same time, sliding between dimensions like a ghost. Status report, she said to the ship's AI. Operation Silent Sweep is proceeding on schedule. The AI replied in a calm, pleasant voice. 73 Hegemony installations have been neutralized. 0 human casualties, 0 witnesses, and the Council? Intelligence indicates growing panic among member species. The Hegemony has requested emergency session to discuss unexplained military losses. Several Council members are beginning to question their support for Hegemony expansion. Elizabeth nodded. It was going exactly as planned. For 3 years, human diplomats had smiled and negotiated while human colonies burned. But they had also been gathering intelligence, mapping every Hegemony installation and preparing for this moment. The galaxy thought it knew what humans were capable of. They had seen human merchant ships, human diplomatic vessels, human civilian colonies. What they had never seen was a human warship at full capability. The Prometheus was just one of 50 ships in the Terran Deep fleet. Ships that had been built in hidden shipyards using technology that most species believed was impossible. Ships that could move faster than light without using jump drives, that could phase in and out of normal space, that could make entire enemy installations simply cease to exist. Ma'am, called the tactical officer. We're approaching the Hegemony supply depot at Ross 128. Orders? Same as before, Elizabeth said. Complete neutralization. No survivors, no evidence. Make it look like they were never there. Understood, ma'am. Elizabeth watched through the view screen as the massive supply depot came into view. Hundreds of ships, thousands of personnel, enough weapons and supplies to support a major military campaign. In 5 minutes, it would all be gone. The humans had tried to play by the galaxy's rules. They had followed the laws, respected the customs, and negotiated in good faith. And the galaxy had responded by treating human lives as acceptable losses. Now the galaxy was learning what humans were really like when they stopped pretending to be civilized. The supply depot vanished in a flash of light that existed in dimensions most species couldn't even perceive. Another message buoy was left behind, broadcasting the same simple warning. Elizabeth turned away from the view screen. Set course for the next target, and send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them Phase 1 is complete. It's time for Phase 2. In the depths of Hegemony space, Admiral Krathzek received reports of 3 more missing installations. His fleet was scattered across a dozen systems, chasing ghosts and finding nothing but empty space. For the first time in his 30-year career, he was beginning to understand what fear felt like. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, 50 human ships continued their work, invisible and unstoppable, teaching the galaxy that there were consequences for treating human children as acceptable losses. Counselor Prime Xalthus had lived for over 800 years. His crystalline body had witnessed the rise and fall of 3 galactic civilizations. He had seen species bloom across the stars and watched others fade into extinction. But he had never seen anything like what was happening to the Hegemony. The emergency council session had been going for 6 hours, and the news kept getting worse. Entire Hegemony fleets were surrendering to single human vessels. Planets that had resisted council forces for decades were sending out white flags within hours of human arrival. The mighty hegemony empire was collapsing faster than anyone thought possible. "This is impossible," declared the Altarian representative, his silver skin flickering with agitation. "The humans don't have this kind of military capability. Our intelligence reports showed primitive weapons, basic ships, limited technology." "Your intelligence reports were wrong," said Admiral Korthvan, the only hegemony officer who had managed to escape the systematic destruction of their fleet. "The humans aren't using primitive weapons. They're using technology that shouldn't exist." Zalthus watched the holographic displays showing the current state of hegemony space. Red markers indicated lost installations. Blue markers showed human fleet positions. There were a lot more blue markers than there should have been. "Explain," he commanded. Admiral Korthvan's scales had turned pale with fear. "Their ships move without jump drives. They appear and disappear at will. Our weapons pass right through them like they're not there. And when they attack," he paused, his voice shaking. "When they attack, there's nothing left. Not debris, not radiation, nothing. It's like they're deleting reality itself." The Zephyrian delegate who had dismissed the New Geneva massacre stood up on his forelegs. "This is clearly some kind of trick. Humans are a young species. They don't have access to reality manipulation technology." Zalthus felt a cold certainty settle in his ancient mind. He had hoped he was wrong, but the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. "Computer, access the Kethrani Deep Archives. Authorization Zalthus Prime." "Alpha, archives accessed," came the mechanical reply. "Display all records relating to the Voidwalkers." The room fell silent as holographic. Images filled the space above the council table. Ancient star charts, archaeological reports, and fragments of text in languages most species had forgotten. The other council members leaned forward, trying to understand what they were seeing. "The Voidwalkers," Zalthus began, his voice heavy with the weight of history, "were the first species to achieve faster-than-light travel. They built the first galactic civilization over 50,000 years ago. They were master warriors, explorer kings who walked between stars like they owned them. The images showed ruined worlds, massive structures that dwarfed anything the current galaxy had built, and weapon signatures that matched nothing in their databases." "What happened to them?" asked the Altarian. "They vanished," Zalthus replied. "One day they were the undisputed masters of the galaxy. The next day they were gone. They left no explanation, no trace, no survivors. Just ruins and warnings carved in stone on 1,000 worlds." He manipulated the display to show close-ups of ancient inscriptions. The warnings all say the same thing. "Here walked those who chose to forget. May they never remember what they were." The room was completely silent now. "You think the humans are descendants of the Voidwalkers?" whispered the Altarian. "I think," said Zalthus, "that the humans are the Voidwalkers. I think they chose to forget their own history, to start over, to see if they could be something better than what they were." He turned to look at the empty seats where the human delegation used to sit, and I think we just reminded them why their ancestors were feared across the galaxy. The tactical display updated again. More red markers, more hegemony losses. But now the blue markers were moving toward council space. Admiral Korthvan pointed at the display with a trembling claw. "They're not just destroying us. They're coming for everyone who supported our expansion. Every species that voted to allow our actions. Every government that called human deaths acceptable losses." Captain Marcus Torres stood on the bridge of the TSF Nemesis and reviewed his orders one more time. Operation Clean Slate was now active, which meant the gloves were completely off. No more surgical strikes. No more quiet disappearances. It was time for the galaxy to see what humans looked like when they stopped pretending to be civilized. "Target acquired," reported his weapons officer. "Zephyrian home fleet, 47 vessels in defensive formation around Zephyr Prime." "Open a communication channel," Torres ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the four-armed admiral commanding the Zephyrian fleet, the same species that had called the New Geneva massacre acceptable. "I am Admiral Thekvar of the Zephyrian Defense Force," came the translated voice. "You are in violation of Zephyrian space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Torres smiled coldly. "I am Captain Marcus Torres of the Terran Strategic Fleet. You have 10 minutes to surrender unconditionally. Any ship that does not power down its weapons will be destroyed." The Zephyrian admiral's forearm spread wide in what Torres recognized as aggressive posturing. "You are one ship against 47. Your threats are meaningless, are they?" Torres asked. He nodded to his weapons officer. The Nemesis fired a single shot. Not at the Zephyrian ships, but at a small asteroid about 50 kilometers away. The asteroid didn't explode or break apart. It simply ceased to exist, erased from reality so completely that the space around it collapsed inward. The Zephyrian fleet went silent. That was a demonstration, Torres said calmly. The next shot will be at your flagship. You now have 9 minutes to surrender. It took less than 3 minutes for every ship in the Zephyrian fleet to power down their weapons and transmit surrender codes. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out. Species that had supported hegemony expansion found human ships appearing in their home systems. Species that had voted to allow human colonies to be destroyed discovered what human weapons could actually do. The surrender requests started pouring in within hours. On Earth, Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen sat in her office reading the reports. The woman who had walked out of the council chambers 3 months ago was now the supreme commander of the largest military force the galaxy had seen in 50,000 years. "Ma'am," said her aide, "we're receiving surrender offers from 17 different governments. The Altarians are offering to pay reparations. The Zephyrians want to negotiate. Even some of the council species are asking for mercy." Sarah looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, her sister's children had been killed on New Geneva. 40,000 innocent people had died because the galaxy thought human lives didn't matter. "Tell them," she said quietly, "that we'll consider their offers after we finish what we started." "And what about the Galactic Council?" Sarah turned back to her desk and picked up a sealed folder marked Operation Judgment Day. "The Council called our deaths acceptable losses," she said. "Now they get to find out what we consider acceptable losses." In the depths of space, the human fleet continued its work. Not just military targets now, but the infrastructure of oppression itself. Every ship that had carried weapons to human colonies. Every station that had supplied the hegemony war machine. Every government building where the decision had been made to treat human children as statistics. The galaxy was learning that humans had very long memories and very little patience for those who hurt their young, and in the ancient archives of the Kithrani, automatic systems activated protocols that had been dormant for 50,000 years, warning signals that had been designed to alert the galaxy when the Voidwalkers returned. The signals screamed out across space, carrying a simple message in the old tongue. They remember. They remember everything. Run. Sarah Chen walked into the council chambers again, but everything was different this time. The same aliens sat in the same seats, but they weren't lounging carelessly anymore. They sat straight and still, their eyes fixed on her with something that looked like fear. The hegemony seat was empty. Not because their representative was late or sick, but because the hegemony empire no longer existed. In 3 months, humanity had dismantled an empire that had dominated a quarter of the galaxy for over 200 years. But that wasn't the most frightening thing for the council members. The most frightening thing was how easily it had been done. "Counselor Prime," Sarah said, nodding politely to Xalthus. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us again." The ancient Kithrani leader's crystalline face showed no emotion, but his voice carried the weight of centuries. "Ambassador Chen, or should I say Fleet Admiral Chen?" "Either one is fine," Sarah replied, taking her seat at the human delegation table. "I've worn many titles in my life." The Zephyrian representative who had dismissed the New Geneva massacre was notably absent. His government had been one of the first to surrender, and their new leadership had been very eager to distance themselves from their predecessors' statements. "You wanted to know our secret," Sarah began, activating a holographic projector. "You wanted to understand how a young species could do what we did. The answer is simple. We're not young." The hologram showed archaeological sites across human space. Massive structures buried under centuries of dirt and vegetation. Ancient cities that had been deliberately abandoned and forgotten. Technology that had been sealed away and left to rust. Every human world sits on the ruins of our first civilization. Sarah continued. "We called ourselves the Eternal Empire back then. We ruled the galaxy for over 30,000 years. The silence in the chamber was complete. But power corrupts," Sarah said, her voice matter-of-fact. "We became what every dominant species becomes. Cruel, arrogant, and convinced of our own superiority. We destroyed species for fun. We enslaved entire star systems. We turned the galaxy into our personal playground. The hologram showed images of ancient battles, weapon tests that had scorched entire worlds, and monuments built from the bones of extinct civilizations. The worst part was that we enjoyed it, Sarah admitted. We told ourselves that might made right, that the strong should rule the weak, that other species existed for our entertainment. Sound familiar? Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But something changed, Sarah continued. A group of humans began to question what we had become. They asked a simple question. If we're so advanced, so intelligent, so powerful, why can't we choose to be better? The hologram shifted to show massive construction projects, archives being sealed, and ships leaving for unknown destinations. So we did something that no species in galactic history had ever done, Sarah said. We chose to forget. We deleted our own databases, sealed away our weapons, and scattered across the galaxy to start over. We wanted to see if we could evolve beyond our nature. Counselor Prime Zalthus leaned forward. The Voidwalker ruins are ours, Sarah confirmed. Every monument, every warning, every piece of ancient technology that your archaeologists couldn't understand. We built them, used them, and then deliberately abandoned them. But why? Asked the Altarian representative. Why give up so much power? Sarah's expression grew sad. Because we realized that power without wisdom is just destruction with better tools. We had the ability to reshape reality itself. But we were using it to hurt people. We decided that maybe it was better to be weak and kind than strong and cruel. She paused the hologram on an image of Earth as it had been 50,000 years ago. Gleaming jewel covered in massive cities and orbital platforms. We kept just enough technology to survive and spread to new worlds. Everything else we buried or destroyed. We started over as a primitive species and worked our way up again, hoping that this time we could do better. And the peace talks? Zalthus asked quietly. Were our final test, Sarah replied. We wanted to see if the galaxy had evolved while we were gone. We wanted to know if it was possible for different species to coexist without one dominating the others. We came to those talks hoping to prove that wisdom could triumph over strength. The chamber filled with the soft sounds of alien breathing and the hum of environmental systems. You failed that test, Sarah said, her voice growing cold. All of you. You proved that the galaxy is still the same place it was 50,000 years ago. The strong still prey on the weak. The majority still decides that minority lives don't matter. Nothing has changed. She stood up and walked to the center of the chamber, where speakers had once dismissed human deaths as acceptable losses. So we remembered, she said simply. We opened the sealed vaults, activated the sleeping protocols, and became what we used to be. Not because we wanted to, but because you convinced us that it was necessary. The Altarian representative was trembling now. What happens to us? Sarah looked at him for a long moment. That depends on you. The hegemony chose to fight, so they don't exist anymore. The Zephyrians chose to surrender and make reparations, so they still have a government. Several species have asked to join the Terran Federation, and we've accepted them. And if we refuse, asked a delegate Sarah didn't recognize. Then you're free to go, Sarah said. The galaxy is big enough for everyone, but there are new rules now. No more conquering younger species. No more enslaving primitive worlds. No more treating other people's children as acceptable losses. She activated another hologram showing human fleets positioned throughout the galaxy. We'll be watching, she said quietly. We'll be there when bullies pick on victims. We'll be there when empires decide to expand at others' expense. We'll be there when anyone decides that genocide is an acceptable solution to their problems. Counselor Prime Zalthus spoke carefully. And if we follow these rules? Then you'll have the protection of the Terran Federation, Sarah replied. Our technology, our knowledge, our support. We'll help you build better worlds, find new solutions to old problems, and create the kind of galaxy we all hoped was possible. She walked back to her seat but remained standing. We spent 50,000 years trying to prove that we could be better than what we were, she said. You helped us remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect the innocent from those who would hurt them. The chamber was silent for several minutes. Finally, Zalthus spoke. What do you need from us? Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. Just a promise. Promise that you'll try to be better than what you were. Promise that when you see someone weaker than you, your first thought will be how to help them, not how to use them. Promise that you'll remember that every species, no matter how young or small, has the right to exist. One by one, The council members agreed. As Sarah left the chamber for the second time, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. Maybe the galaxy could learn. Maybe it could change. Maybe 50,000 years of trying to evolve hadn't been wasted after all. But if it couldn't change, if it chose to return to the old ways of might making right, then humanity would be ready. They had tried being the galaxy's conscience. Now, if necessary, they would be its judgment, and they would make sure that no one ever again dismissed the deaths of children as acceptable losses. 1 year had passed since the day humanity reminded the galaxy what they were capable of. The universe looked very different now. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves stood in the same observation deck of the TSF Prometheus, but the view outside had changed completely. Instead of empty space and hidden targets, she watched as massive cargo ships moved between the stars. The ships carried medicine to former hegemony worlds, food to refugee colonies, and building materials to planets that were rebuilding after decades of war. The Prometheus itself had been completely redesigned. The weapons that could erase matter from existence had been removed and replaced with medical facilities, manufacturing bays, and scientific laboratories. The message was clear: humanity's power hadn't decreased, but it was now being used to create rather than destroy. "Status report," Elizabeth said to the ship's AI. "Reconstruction efforts are ahead of schedule," the AI replied in its calm, friendly voice. "The former hegemony worlds have established stable governments. Refugee resettlement is 93% complete. The new council protocols have been adopted by 47 species with 0 violations in the past 6 months." Elizabeth nodded, satisfied. The new protocols were simple rules that any civilized species could follow. No attacking younger civilizations, no enslaving primitive worlds, no treating genocide as a political solution. Most species had signed on immediately. The few that hadn't were free to go their own way, as long as they didn't bother anyone else. Any problems to report? Minor trade disputes between the Altarians and the Kathrani, but both sides have requested human mediation, rather than resorting to military action. The Zephyrian reparation payments are on schedule. 3 new species have requested membership in the Terran Federation. It was working. The galaxy was learning that cooperation was more profitable than conquest, that helping others was more rewarding than dominating them. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The real change, though, was visible in the new Galactic Council chambers on Earth. The building had been designed by human architects who understood that true authority didn't need to intimidate or impress. The chambers were comfortable, well lit, and built for actual conversation rather than political theater. Elizabeth left the observation deck and made her way to the conference room where the ship's senior staff was meeting. Captain Torres was there along with representatives from a dozen different species. All of them were working together on the same project, making sure that what happened to the human colonies never happened to anyone else. "The early warning network is online," reported Commander Silva, a human officer who had once been a simple merchant captain. "If any species starts making aggressive moves toward their neighbors, we'll know about it within hours." "Good," said Captain Torres. "What about the protection fleet?" "Deployed and ready," answered Admiral Kethra, a former Altarian military officer who had requested transfer to the Terran Federation after seeing what real leadership looked like. "Any species that feels threatened can request immediate assistance. Response time is less than 6 hours for 90% of inhabited systems." Elizabeth smiled. This was what the galaxy could be like when people worked together instead of against each other. Different species bringing their unique strengths to solve common problems. It had taken humanity's return to their old power to make it possible, but now that it was happening, it seemed so obvious that she wondered why it had taken so long. On Earth, Sarah Chen was enjoying her retirement. She had stepped down as Fleet Admiral once the new order was established, leaving the military in the hands of younger officers who had grown up with the ideals of protection rather than conquest. Now she spent her days on a small farm on New Tuscany, growing grapes and making wine, but she still received visitors. Today it was Ambassador Vexithera, the new Zephyrian representative to the Council. His predecessor, the one who had called 40,000 human deaths acceptable, was now working in a refugee camp, helping to resettle the survivors of hegemony aggression. "The wine is excellent," Vexithera said, his forearms carefully holding the delicate glass. "I can see why humans enjoy it so much." Sarah poured herself a glass and sat back in her chair. Her porch overlooked rolling hills covered in vineyards, and the sunset painted everything in shades of gold and red. It was peaceful in a way that she had almost forgotten was possible. "What brings you here, Ambassador?" "Curiosity," Vexthera admitted. "I wanted to understand something. When your people revealed their true nature, when you showed us the power you had been hiding, why did you stop? You could have conquered the entire galaxy in a matter of months. You could have made every species serve humanity. Why didn't you?" Sarah sipped her wine and considered the question. It was one she had asked herself many times over the past year. "Because conquest was never the point," she finally said. "We didn't reveal our capabilities to rule the galaxy. We did it to save it. Save it from what? From itself." Sarah gestured toward the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "The galaxy was caught in a cycle, Ambassador. The strong preyed on the weak grew strong and became predators themselves, and the cycle continued. Species rose and fell, but the pattern never changed." She set down her wineglass and looked directly at the Zephyrian diplomat. "We broke the cycle," she said. "We showed the galaxy that there was another way. That strength could be used to protect instead of conquer. That power could serve wisdom instead of ambition. And if we revert to the old ways? If we forget these lessons?" Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her voice grew colder. "Then we'll remind you again. We've done it before and we can do it again. But I don't think it will be necessary." "Why not?" "Because you've seen what's possible now. Your people are happier, safer, and more prosperous than they've been in generations. Your children don't have to worry about being drafted to fight wars of conquest. Your resources can be used for exploration and art and science instead of building weapons." She picked up her wineglass again and smiled. "Most species, once they experience peace, don't want to go back to war." Vexthera nodded thoughtfully. "There are still those who say that humans are too dangerous to be trusted. That a species with your capabilities will eventually return to conquest." "Maybe," Sarah admitted. "We're not perfect. We're just people, trying to do better than our ancestors did. But we have something that our ancestors didn't have, which is, we remember what it was like to be the victims. We remember watching our children die while others called their deaths acceptable. We remember what it felt like to be helpless." She looked up at the stars again. "As long as we remember that, we'll use our power to protect the helpless instead of creating more victims." Later that evening, after Ambassador Vexthera had left, Sarah walked through her vineyard under the stars. Somewhere up there, human ships patrolled the space lanes, keeping the peace and protecting the innocent. Somewhere up there, former enemies were working together to build a better galaxy. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still conflicts, still species that tested the boundaries of the new protocols. But it was better, much better, and for the first time in 50,000 years, humanity didn't have to choose between being strong and being good. They could be both. In the depths of space, automated monitoring stations maintained their eternal watch. If any species began to show signs of aggressive expansion, if any government started treating other people's children as acceptable losses, the warnings would go out and humanity would remember what they were, capable of when someone threatened the innocent. The galaxy had learned that the most dangerous predator wasn't the one that couldn't choose restraint, but the one that chose it voluntarily. And it had learned that the price of harming humanity's children was the return of the species that had once walked between stars like they owned them. But more importantly, it had learned that there was another way, a better way, and as long as humanity kept watch, that better way would be protected. The stars shone down on a galaxy at peace, and for the first time in millennia, they shone on a future worth protecting.